Andrew Chai, welcome and thank you very much for joining me today. Let's start with your story. Tell me about yourself. What have you been up to throughout your life? Where are you now? And what you're doing pretty much at this stage.
Okay. Um, at this stage of my life, I'm starting up my second startup. I mean, I have been involved in numerous startups before, but normally not as the founder. But there are two startups that I did. The first one was back in 2002, which was revolutionary at that time. Um, After September 11, a few months later, in 2001, that is, right? A few months later, United Airlines lost two aircraft during September 11, and then they filed for bankruptcy. And I was a business analyst at that time for Honeywell Asia Pacific. And being the business analyst person, I asked myself this question, right? Why would such a big airline in the world, I mean, I think they had at that time 100 over aircrafts, which is big, um, lose two aircrafts and then had to file for bankruptcy for Chapter 11. So I took the P&L of United Airlines as a listed company, and I looked through the cost, and then I asked myself this question. I said, if I were the CEO, what would I have done, right, in this crisis? And there were three costs that stood out. One was aircraft, obviously, fuel, and manpower, human capital. So these were the three major costs that the airline had to bear during a period of time where they didn't have business. So if I were the CEO, I would sell the aircraft or lease it out, hedge the fuel or sold it, but I just couldn't sell human capital. Nobody will purchase human capital. So so I asked myself, why didn't they outsource it, right? So uh, and IT outsourcing in the late 1990s and the early 2000s was already pretty mature. But in the aviation industry, nobody thought about outsourcing frontline customer service. So I checked the internet and I found that yeah, they were outsourcing the flight operations, which in my opinion is the most dangerous part of the most critical part of the entire airline operations was safety. And if you could outsource to a pilot from another company, why wouldn't you outsource, flight attendants, which is actually the much bigger cost in terms of proportion? Just to give you an idea, for every 18 flight attendants, there's only two pilots, right? Yeah, you can argue the cost, but if you really did the math, the flight attendant was a lot higher. So why didn't they outsource that? And I decided to start the first outsourcing company, at least in this part of Asia, I believe, for flight attendants. So this was 2002, and and I had to learn human resources, start with this business. And now what am I doing is I exited that business in 2014, and I had an earnout period, and then after that, I did freelance consulting for the church primarily. So my point in my life at this point is coming back to do similar things as what I did during 2002, but using a software to be able to automate some of the assessments, right? So you see my name here called Drometrics. So I use drawings to assess people's attitude, and a lot of things happened in my life that led me to this point. But this second startup is related to the first one, except it is using AI, right? So those are the two pivotal entrepreneurial experience that's led me to where I am today. Yeah.
You went from retirement back to being active again and running a new business then.
Yes, indeed. Actually, I kind of semi-retired, which means I didn't do really meaningful work, I would say, since 2014 till early part of this year. Yeah.
So
So
what made
almost.
you going back and start? What made you go back to starting a new business? why didn't you stay in that retirement if you've successfully already created a venture that enabled you to retire, which is probably for most people the biggest dream they could achieve, retire early and enjoy life down the line. What made you come back?
Actually, if you look at my photograph 10 years ago, before retirement, I actually look much younger. so, so retiring early actually is not a good thing. A lot of people talk about wanting to retire early, but they have no clue what they're talking about. So I had that experience, and a few things allow me, or should I say, help me see the importance of actually coming back to work. One is I'm doing something that I like, so I really don't feel I'm working. So that's the main thing. It's very important. I had some personal investments that didn't go well, and I look back. Had I been a bit more careful with assessing people I work with and invest with, some of those investments would have bear fruits. COVID happened, and during COVID, remote working was the flavor of the month during that time, and it still is to some extent. And I realized that we were actually the pioneers. In 2002, we were remotely hiring people. I hired my staff. Of course, I did see them in an interview, but after that, I basically didn't see them for 8 years. Right. So if I met them on the street, I wouldn't even remember their name. So we were working with them remotely. Um, in the early days, since 2002, 2003, we were really the pioneers of remote employment. And so I didn't realize that, wow, okay, so the world with COVID gravitated towards remote work, but we're really the expert, if you will, in learning to hire people remotely and knowing who we can hire that we can give 100% empowerment. We don't really need to supervise them. I do have a small remote team right now, and if you talk to them, they'll tell you I don't need to supervise them. If I did the hiring, as I assess their attitude, not that the skills are not important, but if I assess their attitude accurately enough, I actually have somebody who is very, very self-driven. They can work remotely with full empowerment and full trust. So I decided to come back to do this because one, we have the secret, if you will, for a greatly empowered team.
Mhm. So, what's your view?
Two,
I mean, there is a huge debate online about the remote working environment. Since the pandemic started, a lot of people, or pretty much everyone, where possible, worked remotely. What's your view? Because a lot of companies or business owners are now looking back and saying remote work is not efficient, and others disagree because it would enable them giving more flexibility to individuals who need that flexibility because either they have to look after the children, um, maybe they have disabilities, or any other reasons. What's your call on this? Because you're saying with your company, you're measuring the attitude of an individual, not the necessarily skill set, because skills you could teach them or they
right,
could acquire over a period of time.
right. So there are 2 points that you mentioned here, which I want to explain. Let me explain the more important one, right? So my views about remote work. The current situation in the world about remote work was created not by choice. It was created by the pandemic. That's a big difference between what we were doing and what the pandemic has forced companies to move employees to become remote. We hired remotely by choice, right? So if I show you the contracts of what we had before, the word remote was written all over it in terms of you'll be working from that country. We are based in Singapore, they're based in India, for example. It was hiring by choice, number one. The candidate who came to the interviews knew they were going to work remotely. We were assessing their attitude to be allow them to work remotely with minimal supervision. Um, so it was a remote hiring by choice, and we were assessing them for that suitability. Whereas the pandemic forced companies to move people that were not recruited or not suitable for remote work and force them or allow them, maybe not force them, but allow them to move into a remote or a hybrid work kind of arrangements, right? And then they have difficulty moving them back. Well, rightfully so, because they were not remote hiring was not the premise. They were employed to begin with. In our situation, we had assessed their suitability for both remote and in-office work. So if I called my staff now and I said, "Okay, all of you come back to office," none of them will revolt. All right, none of them will say no, because we already made sure that the attributes and the attitude that they have was suitable enough and flexible enough to be able to handle whether it's remote, whether it's hybrid, or whether it's on-site in office, right? So that's the first comment. So that's how we're different. The second comment is it the right, do we, because we assess attitude and we don't assess skills is not exactly correct, because we do assess skills, but they must have the bare um, minimal amount of skills for us to accept somebody on hiring, right? So if I were hiring somebody for marketing, for example, they must have some exposure in marketing. But the attitude, if we had to choose between the two, obviously we want both. But if we had to choose, we will place a significant emphasis, maybe 75% on attitude and 25% of skills. Which means if they were not on par on skills, then the question that we will ask is, do they have the right attitude to pick up those skills, and do they have the right frame of mind or the current state of mind to be able to learn those on the job and eventually get to the point that they become productive. So these are my comments with regards to remote hiring. I think certain positions is impossible to work remotely. Certain very operational positions that require the person, and then there are a lot of positions that remote working is actually perfectly fine, right? Yeah. So we look at suitability, both in terms of attitude, the functional areas, and of course the skill sets that's required. I hope that answers your questions.
Would you say they should be still entitled to choose if their work enables them to do their job remotely and they're not physically required to be in the office? Do you think company owners or businesses should give them the option now that they've experienced working remotely is possible and they can do it?
Um, I think there's one step that's missing here. Uh, Now, during that period of COVID, I was retired, right? So I wasn't actively working with any clients. If I had a client that came to me and said, "Hey, Andrew, because of COVID, we're going to move the entire workforce to remote um, by force or for health reasons or health regulation reasons, what is your take?" My answer would be, have you assessed, have you reassessed, have you re-interviewed those employees that you now want to move to remote? That's the first thing, because you want to know who is going to be suitable for that and who isn't. Okay, so that's an important data point to know. Um, it was not a one-way street, right? I mean, we all know at that point, we all speculate that COVID will take some years to blow over, but eventually they'll have to come back. So who do I actually choose to keep and move them to a remote work environment with the understanding that when I do need them back, they're not going to fight. There won't be a great resignation. So that's the job landscape has changed. The behavioral attitude towards working remotely versus working in an office where you have to punch a card or a supervisor needs to have sight of you. Those are totally different behavioral traits. So, so I would say companies need to do a reassessment, which they didn't. I think, I mean, I dare say 90, maybe 95, maybe even 100% of companies just went with whatever was a requirement at that time. Now, having said that, had they inevitably transitioned the team to remote and now want to make adjustments, then they have to reassess again, right?
Hmm.
Who can come back and who are willing to come back, and who isn't, and then the ones who aren't ready to come back, can they work remotely, right? So again, they need to do an assessment. Now, you hear things like um, audit is done on an annual basis, performance appraisal is done on an annual basis, uh, employee engagement is done on a quarterly basis. They're all surveys and so on, but nobody talk of a re-interview. No one talk about how when the job scope has changed or the work environment has changed, what is that re-interview process? And usually, it's a lot less stringent, or a lot less um, process driven. Is more of, oh, what is my experience with this person? Can they take on that role? And then it's an internal discussion. There wasn't an assessment, is what I'm saying. There wasn't a, hey, do they have the right attributes to be able to now work remotely or come back, right? So it was a blanket kind of a rule or policy that was made, and basically the CEO decides, okay, everyone I mean, you read a lot of it in the papers, right? um, Microsoft, Tesla, Google, they just make a policy. Okay, everybody comes back, right? I don't think there's a one size fits all, because the going was one size fits all, but the coming back is a totally different ballgame, and that's why you see a lot of resistance, right? Because once people enjoy, if there's such a term, of remote working, where they have more flexibility and they find that that's a new empowerment, they are reluctant to change.
Okay.
Well,
And your business that you're currently running, do you think you could enable other businesses to make better decision of enabling people to work remotely? Would that fit into all the industries? Could your idea, your technology, your solution work for others? Could you help them with your ideas?
um, the short answer is yes, but that's a very complicated solution. We in our in using Drawmetrics, which is a drawing based assessment, and I'll talk a little bit about the drawing, because when children cannot articulate their feelings, they use drawings to express themselves. Right? That's how psychologists, psychiatrists identify trauma that children are going through, because they cannot articulate the pain they're going through. So drawings is extremely accurate, and it reflects the subconscious mind and whatever is deep seated in them. So we use drawings to identify if what is the current state of mind of a person, right? And that tells us, are they independent? Do they prefer to work alone? Do they enjoy people? Are they people that, so they really want to hang out with other folks? So those are the ones that we know wouldn't mind coming back to a office environment. Can they work remotely? They can. There are certain key attributes to look for, but they can also be flexible enough to come back to on-site work. So in our report, we actually have a suitability for remote work, where we grade them. It's difficult to come to a percentage, but we said whether they were, uh, you know, medium or low or high suitability working remotely. Of course, we also assess their hireability, right? Whether a company should hire them based on the values that the individual has. These values, some people call it personality trait. We prefer to call it values. Some people call it behavioral trait. I think it's quite close, but we prefer to call it values, because whatever we value as important, our actions will demonstrate that importance. So our behavior and our actions and our decisions follow what we value something to be. So if we value honesty, for example, as a value, we tell the truth, right? And it's not personality dependent. Different personality has the ability to be honest. or dishonest, right? So that's why we call them values. So if we were assessing their values, or we were understanding, maybe assessing is a strong word, if we were understanding what is valuable to them, let's say um, one of the values is work-life balance, right? And that would simply mean that they can come back to work 9 to 5, but leave them alone on weekends or leave them alone after office hours, right? They are not expected to then respond to email or messages that they see that is related to work. That's an example of what are the values that we look for, right? So yeah, what we can do right now is to identify how companies can hire more accurately, because I think companies only have 50% of the view right now. They are only assessing experience and skills, right? If anyone that's hearing this, you understand that your experience, your skills, almost could not be put on a piece of paper. I mean, you cannot have 10 years or 20 years of experience that you have gone through that you can summarize so succinctly and accurately on a piece of paper called resume. That's one thing. There are things that are not captured on a day-to-day behavioral basis, that is values related, like how do you make decisions when you buy a house, how do you look at things that is family, is never captured in a resume, right? So that's the other 50%, and those are the other 50% that actually determines how they work. We cannot separate our personal lives and our professional lives. They are intertwined, however we like it, right? If we had a bad day at home over a weekend, I don't think Monday will be a day that you jump up and down and say, hey, everything's good. I mean, we're emotional beings. We're intertwined with what happens at home, and Drometrics draws all of that out between your personal and your professional space. And sometimes there's conflict between them, right? How we behave at work and how we behave at home is different, and those are the conflict that allows us to see a person true colors, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back in time. Tell me
Mhm.
about where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
Oh. Every Sunday I drive past my childhood place on my way to church. It was what we call a village, or in Singapore slang, a kampong, right? A kampong is really a village. And the road is still there, the petrol kiosk is still there. It was very poor. My father is a teacher, but he's from Malaysia, so he's not entitled to pension. My mom is a seamstress, but a very kind one. So she would make dresses for people from church, and she charges them $20 for a dress. And if they come back for an alteration, which she should charge another $2, she would give it for free. So if they put on weight and they lose weight, doesn't matter, right? She will do the alteration for free. And when I asked her, when I was old enough to ask her, she says things like, "Hey, it's only $2. It's a lot of money, by the way, during that time. But why make somebody pay something when gaining weight and losing weight is part of every woman's journey, if you will." So she was a very kind businesswoman that did make a lot of money, right? My So that's how I grew up. We grew up very poor. I was the youngest of six. We made our own toys. I look back at some of the photographs that I have. Our holidays were only church camps. That's our holiday. That's our vacation. We will just go to church because it's free lodging, if you will, right? And we grew up very poor. So I remember that my Christmas presents were just a pack of biscuits. That's Christmas present. That to us was, you know, everything, right? We didn't. If there was a lucky draw and we had some toys, great. If not, my parents would not spend money to buy toys. When I was growing up, I recall vividly an incident where I every day I had some beverage in school, and it cost about maybe 20 cents. at that time, back in the late early 1970s. And one day I was, my brother came and asked me, um, what would you like to have today? And I wanted a different drink, right? So I wanted another malt flavored beverage, so called Horlicks. So I said, can I have Horlicks today instead? Since he gave me a choice. And Horlicks was 5 cents more. So it was 25 cents instead of 20 cents. And when my brother went to tell my mom, she was ballistic, right? She got really angry and she came in, barged into my room. Actually, I was taking a shower, so and she started caning me for not understanding the financial situation at home. So that was how poor we were when we were growing up. And I remember vividly that, we had the same breakfast, we had the same food, we ate from our own small little um, plantation of vegetables that we had at the backyard. We reared our own chicken, so we had our own chicken coop, and our protein came from there. Yeah. So that was life in the early days, in the 60s and 70s. And of course, everything was hand me down, right? Being the youngest of six, so you imagine, by the time by the time the pencil or pen came to me, especially the eraser, it was already, this small and all black. Nothing could really be used. So at a young age, I was very motivated to be able to afford my own things because I had difficulty with basic stationery. And my father, being a teacher in a school that I went to, it was embarrassing because everybody knew him. At some point, he was promoted to become a dean and eventually the vice principal. And during that period of time, I'm well known in school as the dean's son, younger son. But my stationery was pathetic. If I could draw a picture, you know what I mean. It is almost as if I came from an orphanage. That's how I grew up.
Would you still say your childhood, teenage years, or the times you grew up at were better than today's times? How children and teenagers grow up today? And if yes, why?
The answer is yes, for a few reasons. One, things were much cheaper then. uh, that's one of the things that there's a major difference. Life was simpler. People honor what they say. Of course, I wasn't in any way. I mean, I didn't know anything about legality and contracts and documents. But I remember that when we make an appointment to meet someone, we said it verbally in person. Let's say we're going to meet next week. Nobody changed the dates after that, right? People honor the promises that they made. There is no way. There's no mobile phone. There's no cell phone. There's no way of being able to. I mean, we can call the person's home if there's something really urgent, but most of us just show up, right? So people show up. People honor what they say. Um, Life was less complicated as a result. Although we were poor, we were also happier. We had we
Mhm.
had we had less of all the complications. I remember when I was that at that time, we we never heard of a word called scam. It didn't exist. I'm sure there are some people who got scammed that I didn't know, but it was such a remote idea. Today, you read it every other week, right? Or something that happened in the world. Yeah, I guess, yeah, life was simpler. Yeah.
Okay. Um, who are the most important people in your life growing up, and how would they shape you as a person, the person you are today?
Well, the most important person is my mom. How she shaped who I am today, and I have many examples of how she helped me become who I am. But one of the favorite story that I tell my my wife and my close friends was I was 13 years old, and we moved from that village to a public housing somewhere in the east of Singapore. And when 13, I was able to go to the market to buy things and run errands for my mother. So one of the days while while walking across the street, um, I saw a kid that was younger, maybe 6, I don't know, half my age perhaps, on the opposite side of the road trying to cross. And there was no cars on the road, except in a distance there was a older elderly man on a scooter, right, on a smaller motorcycle, right. And lo and behold, I saw that, but as the kid was crossing, he was distracted by something else. He was actually knocked over by the old man. He suffered some bruises on his face, but I witnessed how the small kid got up, ran to the scooter rider, and hit him. Right, so that left an impression in my mind. Um, but I did nothing. So I went, realizing that nothing major happened. I went on and did my errands. When I came back, I told my mother what happened. I described the exact scene I just described. She was really upset, right? And she asked me, um, what would I have done had that been my best friend, right? What would I have done had that been my sister? What would I have done had that been somebody that I knew? I said I would have yelled out because I saw the scooter coming and I saw that the boy was not paying attention. I would have alerted him. And then she asked me, why didn't I do anything? I mean, I couldn't answer her. I just said, well, because I don't know the kid. And so she told me, she said, that is not the way to handle things. Uh, my mom, um, my mom came from a family that were very rich. That means my grandfather, her father, but lost everything during World War II. They brought all their wealth and put it in a safe, and a bomb landed on it. So my mom became very poor and then grew up. Um, Subsequently, she didn't go to school anymore. She grew up, she was, I think, 12 at that time. And she grew up in a monastery, a Catholic monastery, and became a Catholic and learned how to sew from the nuns. And so she told me that if God gives us an opportunity to see something that happened in front of our eyes, we are no longer innocent. We are then required to do something, right? Our integrity is tested based on that. Are we going to say or do something for the weaker, in this case, the young kid, the marginalized, or the poor? That was how she taught me. That's why when people came to her, some of them she collected the alteration fees, but the others that were poorer, she gave it for free because she didn't want to make money from the poor. So that was the impact. um, how I was growing up. I remember this extremely as a life lesson, that if we see something, we have to act. We can no longer pretend that we didn't see it. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. And if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
Money is not everything. Family is. I think I was, because I grew up poor, and I mean, there are 6 of us, plus my parents, and my mom had two assistant seamstress that were helping her, and my grandfather. So there were 11 of us living in a 3-bedroom apartment, right? My brothers have to sleep on the floor outside, in the living hall. We had bunk beds, obviously, and at the time when I was going to do my A levels, right? Um, I only had $2.50 for lunch, but I could not afford dinner because that's all I have. right? And 250 was enough to buy lunch and have a food and drinks. And so I could only afford one meal. Now I can come home and eat, but won't be able to study because it's extremely noisy in an apartment with 10 others. Or I can stay out in a school till late and study there. So I chose the latter, and I decided to keep the $2.50 for dinner so that I won't go hungry at night. What do I do with lunch, right? So for a full year, I had biscuits for lunch, the same biscuits for a full year. That was my lunch for a full year. And during that time, I remember telling myself, I do not want to be poor ever again because I grew up poor and I went through that difficult period. I was embarrassed to tell my classmates that I didn't have money for lunch, and it was face value, right? So that's one advice I would give myself. Money is not everything. Um, Even though you're poor, or even though I'm poor at that time, I survived. I I had biscuit for lunch and I survived, and that was a motivating factor for me. Family is more important. So I remember that during my early working lives, when I was busy making money, I neglected my parents. I neglected my family. Um, Whenever I had time, I hang out with friends. So I didn't. Money was so important. When my mom asked me to go on a pilgrimage trip with her to Lourdes in France, I declined, right? Because I was trying to save the money. And then if I look back, I never had a single holiday with my parents other than the ones in church. When they were able to travel, I didn't, because of how important, because of that episode of 1 year of being poor, very poor, and eating only biscuits for lunch. I I didn't cherish the memories of going on a holiday with her for a few $1,000s that I was trying to save. Yeah. So if there's one advice, money's not everything.
So, at what point in life did you reach the point where you have identified that you do want to be rich or have money, but not compromise work, monetary aspect, and family? When did you see the balance that you have to spend equal times with the people you love the most, but also at the same time working towards your venture to achieve the results that you have today?
Um, the concept of work-life balance didn't hit me until my mother passed away. Okay, so that was in 2013. I mentioned earlier I exited the business in 2014. When my mother passed away, somebody had to look after my father, and I had one sister overseas, another brother overseas, and another brother was having difficulty managing his personal and professional life, and another sister who passed on. So there was only left with two of us, my elder sister and myself. So number one and number six, that was physically in Singapore, and we took turns to look after my dad. So first, I exited the business uh, during that time. I took whatever savings I had. I kept myself going, and then I spent time the first 3 months because my father has dementia, and he retired very young, right? Well, young by today's definition, he retired at 55. I semi-retired at 45, but it was not the right thing to do. Anyway, I took that time to balance things and said, okay, what is important? So the last 4 years of my father's life was important to me. I had the I had the blessings of taking him to church every Sunday. and he enjoyed a certain noodle store in near the place that we grew up. And I would take him there, and every Sunday, because he has dementia, he will say the same thing. He will say that he has not had this noodle for a long time, but every Sunday he says the same thing. But he enjoyed it. That During that period of time, uh, I became a son. I became a responsible. I remember this very vividly because one of my church member was also my family physician, as in a family doctor that we see often. And then I remember one day when after my dad passed away, she told me, she said, um, she saw how I held my father's hands as I brought him to church, and she made this comment to herself. She says, if any one of her children, and she's got 10, she said if she wants to retire, she wants at least one of them to be like what she saw, what I did. And that really moved me because I didn't think anybody noticed. Right now, my father goes to church very early. The mass, the service starts at 7:15 in the morning. So I had to wake up like 6 something, because I don't stay at his place, so I have to make arrangements. And on a weekend, for most people, that's very difficult to do. But that was when I realized the balance was extremely important. Um, and I enjoyed the last 4 years of his life. And the blessing I got was I usually go on holidays near the end of the year, and for some strange reason during that time of his passing, I chose to go to a very nearby vacation, which is only an hour away by boat. I was there for a few days, and then my sister called me and said, Dad is not in very good shape. So I actually made it back because it was only an hour away. And I spent the last night with him, and I was the only one with him, on his dying bed. I knew he was going. I tried to stay awake, and eventually I fell asleep. The nurses woke me up because I was at the hospital. And strangely, I didn't get to see his last breath. They say it's very painful when you see somebody's last breath, especially your loved ones. I had to run to the toilet. So when I went to the toilet and came back, he already breathed his last. But I was with him. And that brought a lot of consolation of the 4 years that I made work and life, even though I, I only had to earn out. I didn't have to do that much. But that was when I really realized that we could be very, very efficient in what we do, still accomplish our professional goals and our personal goals. And that's family.
Thank you for sharing this. I've got two more questions for you. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing younger generations today, and how could they overcome it in general?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, man. Um, I think that there are few major challenge. One of the biggest challenge youngsters feel today is the influence of social media. Right, the influence of social media has created in their mind an ideal lifestyle, and that ideal lifestyle is one of comparison, one of get rich quick, one of do anything to look good, which is not real. So, because of social media, because of the availability of information at such a fast pace, the young today doesn't question whatever they see is real or not, right? And is it meaningful to them? It is perception. So I think the biggest challenge is they are living a dream through the eyes of somebody else. And they have taken their eyes off what is the most important aspect of life. which is relationships with their loved ones, their family. Um, I mean, it's very, very sad. Whenever I go out and eat, I see children looking at their phones, and talking to somebody else via messaging instead of the parents sitting in front of them, right? So I think that's a big challenge. I can't change that. Um, I'm teaching my kids how to make that balance, because ultimately, think about it. When we are feeling ill, or we're not feeling well, when we're sick, the last thing we want to do is check out what's on our Facebook, our Instagram, or LinkedIn, right? Um, yeah, I remember a few weeks ago when I actually had COVID. LinkedIn was the last thing on my mind, right? My family was probably the most important aspect. And I think that gives us the perspective. And I think the young people today have to recognize that technology has taken the relationship, and with AI, it's going to just make it worse. I remember telling my wife a few days ago, what has the world come to, right? It's complicated. It is extremely competitive, high inflation, in part due to COVID, but plus other reasons. But most important, where is the center of their lives, right? For a lot of people, it is advertising, it is social media, it's extremely unproductive things. I mean, I've been forced to use social media as a result, right? In marketing, we now have to use social media. So sad, but that's the truth. Yeah.
So, on that note, what would you be your final words of wisdom to pass on to the younger generation?
Um, do what they're passionate about. Uh, Actually, everybody is born and gifted by God to have a passion. The thing is, you cannot determine passion by reading a book. You can only determine passion with your eyes, right? I mean, think about how we go shopping, right? We browse and then we see something that we like, and if kids reminding us over a period of time, we think that's something that we want to purchase or we want to own, right? So passion is a form of discovery. I mean, I coach people on how they discover their passion, right? So recently I had a coachee that was struggling professionally, but eventually realized that there was certain aspect of his work that was his passion that he didn't understand, right? So so the last word of wisdom is focus on your passion. If you're passionate about it, a few things happen. One, you learn very fast about that subject matter, whatever that is. Two, you become very good at it, and people see value in that. And when we learn very fast, you become good at it, and over a period of time, people pay you for that, whatever that passion is, and that becomes a livelihood. Then they technically retire early. They're still working. Don't get me wrong, but they're doing what they like. So that's yeah. So if I were to relive my life again, I would have discovered or worked to discover my passion earlier, so that I would then make it into a lifelong work that is meaningful, financially rewarding, so that takes care of the money side of the of the equation, and also reduce the amount of stress. Stress is an indication that they are not working in their passion. Because if it's their passion, there's no stress, right? Yeah, if they feel stress, means they are put into a job that they are not good at. That's an indication that they're not pursuing their passion. So if you talk to any of the well-known entrepreneur, I'm not that well-known, but if you talk to anybody, they'll tell you follow your passion, do what you like, right? The question is, how do you discover that? That's that's a separate topic altogether.
All right, Andrew. Thank you very much, really, for taking the time to share your knowledge and wisdom. I really appreciate it. And you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Matt.